So you actually have four groups of people here who represent four different approaches to this concept of truth. Four different approaches to life, meaning, and happiness. We have on the one hand Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate is, as I said earlier, the typical product of Greco-Roman culture. And he is the skeptic. He doubts that you can know truth, that there is even such a thing as an absolute truth. And then you have the two religious groups. Pontius Pilate represents what we would call today the secular skeptic. But the Jews represent all other religious groups. Now you may say, well, they're not the same as a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Muslim perhaps, but nevertheless, these two groups of Jews represent all other religions in the world except for biblical Christianity. Now, I want you to understand that when I talk about religion, I'm not talking about biblical Christianity. Let's get an important definition down. Religion is man trying to gain God's approval, God's blessing, God's approbation by his own works. It's man thinking that if I engage in certain rituals or if I have a certain moral rectitude, if I live a good life, then God is going to bless me. And whatever heaven you believe in, whether it's a paradise or a nirvana or whatever it may be, that you will arrive there after death simply because you've been a relatively good person. And that concept underscores every religious system in the world other than biblical Christianity. And this was evident among these two groups with the Jews. The Sadducees represent a more liberal form of religion. They weren't so sure there was anything supernatural. And the Pharisees represented a much more rigorous, ethical group, the Jewish fundamentalists, as it were, that if we follow the Mosaic Law, not only the 613 commandments in the Mosaic Law, but if we follow all of the other thousands of regulations we've laid down in our tradition, that somehow that will meet God's approval and He will save us. Over against those three groups, you have the claims of Jesus Christ, who, and you have to catch the irony of the whole scene here. Here's Pilate saying, truth, what's that? And he's saying that to the man who said that he is the truth. He embodies the truth. He is the eternal truth. He claimed to be God. Now there are those who claimed that he was just a good man or a prophet, but that's not why they crucified him. If he'd only claimed to be a good man or a prophet, the Jews would never have crucified him. They had him there in front of Pilate because he claimed to be God. He claimed to be the God of the Old Testament. He claimed to be full, undiminished deity. And the Jews clearly understood that. And because they rejected his claim to be God, they were going to punish him according to the law, which was death. It was a capital offense. But because they were a province of Roman Empire, they did not have the freedom under the law to execute for capital crime. So they had to go to the Roman authority. That's why they went before Pilate. And so here you have Pilate just skeptically questioning the existence of truth in the very face of the one who is the truth. Now, to understand how this sets us up for understanding the controversy between truth claims, I want to start with Pilate. Pilate, the classic skeptic. Pilate represents the views of skeptics down through the ages who just don't want to accept the fact that there is some eternal truth that they must conform their thinking. He offers this dismissive remark, and it reveals that he's a pragmatic man. He is the administrator of the Roman province. He's the proconsul. He's the governor of Judea. It is his responsibility to administer the kingdom, and he just really doesn't care about getting distracted by religious claims for truth or philosophical argumentation. As a product of the Roman Empire, this is a man who's well educated. He's familiar with the philosophers that have influenced Greco-Roman culture. He knows about the philosophers that preceded Socrates. He knows about Socrates. He knows about Plato. He knows about Aristotle. He knows about the Stoics and the Epicureans and the Sophists and all the different views. And by this time in history, most people in the Roman Empire had become skeptics. They had seen for 500 years various philosophical systems come and go, making claims to offer truth. And yet, as soon as one came on the scene, another would follow it that would demonstrate its inability to handle the real issues of life, and you'd shift from one philosophy to another. And so by this time, they've played out all the philosophical investigation, and there doesn't seem to be anybody who can give an answer to the question, what is truth? So to understand Pilate a little bit, we have to understand the history of ideas that shaped this skepticism, because the skepticism that shaped Pilate in 30 A.D. is the same skepticism, there are the same ideas that have produced the skepticism in the 20th century and 21st century in the world today. And as we look back in ancient history and trace these ideas, what we're going to see is the same influences that each one of us have faced. So we'll go back, and we won't go back too far. We'll go back to simply Plato and Aristotle. Now, to understand what a revolution occurred in Greece in the 5th century BC, we must realize that prior to that time, in all of the ancient civilizations, whether it was the Egyptians or the Babylonians or the Assyrians or the Canaanites, all of these cultures were polytheistic. That means they worshipped numerous gods and goddesses. They were idol worshippers. They had deified the forces of nature. And as a result of that, they made man subservient to nature, and the end result of several thousand years of idolatry was that it produced vicious human cultures that were violent and destructive and offered people no hope. And it's fascinating to look at history, but in roughly the 6th to 7th century BC, there came a time when all of these idolatrous systems tended to wipe out, and men started looking for solutions and for answers in another direction. This is when the Greek philosophers came on the scene. You have your pre-Socratic philosophers about the 6th century BC, and then as their thought developed and influenced, it sort of culminated in the person of Plato. And so you had two great philosophers, Plato and then his student Aristotle. And this is just a picture on the screen that focuses on the two great philosophers. Plato's on the left, Aristotle is on the right. Aristotle was Plato's student, and Aristotle was, by the way, the tutor of Alexander the Great. But if you notice in the picture, it has Plato with his finger pointed upward, and Aristotle has his hand pointed downward, and this is to picture, by the way, this is from Raphael's famous painting, The School of the Prophets, and he is picturing the fact that for Plato, ultimate reality was in this upper realm of the ideas. But Aristotle came along and said, no, that really doesn't answer the issues, answer the questions. The real answers are found in reality, in the study of things in the created, in nature itself. So Plato comes along and says that reality is above. It's not in the world that we see and experience with our senses. The material world for Plato is nothing more than a shadow, a reflection of these ultimate ideals. And he called those ultimate ideals forms. Later on, it's the Apostle Paul who comes along and says that Jesus Christ, although he existed in the form of God. See, he picks up that philosophical terminology to indicate that the ultimate reality, again, is Jesus Christ.